Welcome back, everybody. In the wake of the impeachment acquittal of Donald Trump in this week's edition of The Spotlight, we're turning to Harry Litman, host of the Talking Feds podcast, where in a Breaking Edition episode, he and a panel of legal and congressional experts broke down the former president's trial, the evidence put forward, and the implications of Trump's acquittal on the Republican Party's future. Joining me now is former U.S. attorney and host of the Talking Feds podcast, Harry Litman. Harry, good to see you this afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this. I got to tell you, I had not yet listened to your podcast. I knew you were coming on. So this morning on my run, I took a listen. It's really good. So I'll start with that.
Especially when people aren't commuting anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's so great to listen to a podcast when you're running because it's like all you can concentrate on is what you guys are saying. But I guess before we really get into the kind of the nitty gritty and the podcast that you released last night, give me first your reaction to the acquittal yesterday and how the case kind of was presented.
Sure. Look, I think it was presented impeccably, as well as it could have been, not even better than they say. There were many little sort of trial lawyer nuances that they did perfectly. I'm really struck at the range of opinion, including among people who often agree today, from overall satisfaction to rage and heartbreak. I am more on the sanguine side. Yes, the Republicans were in the tank. Yes, the arguments they advanced were bogus and they violated their oaths. Nevertheless, I think it's clear that today Trump stands convicted on the facts before the country and the world and history of a really appalling, even monstrous dereliction of duty. That's where his defenders have to now begin. And I think that's a pretty positive development, especially when you consider the jurors were, in fact, in the tank.
So I want to be clear here, even though you feel as if he was not convicted in the Senate, you feel as if the case presented over the last couple of days swayed Americans to understand, folks maybe that were on the fence about this, to understand the lead up and what actually took place on January 6th. With the president
I do, and that's the import of McConnell's speech as well. And contrast it, Yasmin, with what happened in the Mueller report or impeachment one. We really have a set of facts that are easy to grasp and are stunningly monstrous on his part, and imposing danger on his vice president, really being gleeful about the deadly damage at the Capitol. Nobody can really dispute those. And that being the case, I just think it means going forward, Trumpism has a real burden. It's not disappeared, but I think they've gone a long way, more than half the way, to sort of making it harder for him to have the chokehold on the country that he's had for the last few years.
I'm happy that you made that transition for us, this idea of Trumpism and what's going to happen to it, because you actually talked about it on your podcast, kind of the future of the Republican Party, or at least for the next couple of months. And on this podcast, you had Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who we well know served as a House manager in Trump's first impeachment trial. You also had Matt Miller, who a lot of folks that watch MS are familiar with, and Norm Ornstein as well, joining your panel. Such a good conversation. I want to play a little bit of it for you and have you react on the other side.
Okay.
Absent him running again, which we won't see we wouldn't see for a couple of years, I think there is going to be an interest in the Republican Party to, on the short term, forget that Donald Trump exists, not because he's just a political liability to him, but because there's an interest in the Republican Party facing unified Democratic control to just point all of their, metaphorical weapons at Joe Biden and be attacking the Democratic administration. And I think, in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, I don't know that we're going to be talking about Donald Trump very much.
So it's an interesting take, and I believe that was that Matt Miller that was talking there? I think so. Yeah. So it's an interesting take because we know that Trump doesn't have the megaphone that he once had, right? He doesn't have Twitter, in which so many of his directions to his followers came on Twitter, basically. But nonetheless, there's kind of a sphere of folks inside the Republican Party. There is the Mitch McConnells of the world who seems like he wanted to disassociate himself from Trump yesterday in his speech. But then there's a Lindsey Graham who says, look, and he's coming back hard and fast. I mean, in fact, I'm going, I'm going golfing with him in Florida in just a couple of days.
With my best buddy. So just to bring it back to the podcast, that's fairly typical to have three different voices around a round table. They're diverse. It's not an amen chorus. They can be from different realms. It's typical to have maybe a senator and a congressman or governor, a very prominent journalist, and say a policy person. And, you know, if the vibe is right, and that's my job, it can really sort of soar. It's 40 minutes of discussion that I think is a little looser and more dynamic. The conceit here is that we're all in a booth in our favorite bar in the back and really being kind of candid. And I think, you know, we get a lot of great reviews, but the ones that gratify me the most are people who say, I think about this a little different now, or that really kind of changed my mind. So the roundtable effect of it and the 45 minutes of people who often are never together, sometimes they're even from CNN, I think is really the hallmark of the podcast.
It's a good podcast. If you haven't taken a listen, you should really take a listen. And we're always looking for a good vibe. You know, we always got to get the vibe right. That's always the most important thing. Harry Litman, good to talk to you on this Sunday afternoon.
Thank you so much,
Thank you as always. Yeah. All right. You can tune in, by the way, and subscribe to Talking Feds wherever you get your podcasts. And you don't want to miss the next episode featuring some very familiar MSNBC faces and voices, including Lawrence O'Donnell and Ashley Parker, out next Monday.